we're gonna miss stuff. I started this channel. I started this channel and I basically either do conversations with people or just think out loud on it. And I was pretty surprised to see that people were interested. And so that's what I've been doing for a couple of years. And
Okay, fantastic. And I really, again, I apologize for not, I'm trying to think like why, like, because your request was so, as they say, in my wheelhouse, like why I missed it. I only think it was I was just coming back from Indonesia and I was getting lots of different DMs and I just missed it.
I think the timing is perfect. I don't think we could find a better day to talk. Today is the perfect day, with the whole country sort of hanging between these two individuals. And for me, it is, I, from what I read in your book, which I loved. There's a blogger, Esther O'Reilly, who just pestered and pestered and pestered me because of my channel. She said, "You've got to read this book." Like, everybody's always telling me I got to read books. And I picked up the book and it was like, oh yeah, now I see why she was bothering me. Because
she's been very sweet to me.
Yeah.
It's very sweet of her.
Because I love your story. And well, why don't we, for those who haven't read the book, why don't we begin with your story and who you are, how you grew up, and how you started this strange odyssey and where it's led you.
Well, thank you. First, I'll introduce myself with my pronunciation. My name, everybody gets it wrong. My last name is Chris Arnade. I'm Chris Arnade. I would give you a copy of the book, but I would hold up a copy of the book, but I gave them all away.
I left mine at home. I was saying I got to take it to work today, but there it is.
This is a draft copy, but anyways, I tend to give my books away when I have them. But it's called Dignity, Seeking Respect in Back Row America, and the cartoonish character description of who I am. I was a PhD in physics who was a Wall Street trader. So if you've seen the movie Big Short, or if you've read Liar Poker, that was me. In fact, I went to the exact same company where Liar's Poker was set, Salomon Brothers, after getting a PhD in particle physics. And then I did that for 20 years. And then I ended up spending time with prostitutes, addicts, and homeless people. And 8 years, basically 7 years, quit my job to spend time documenting the lives of people who I call are in the back row, who kind of overlooked by society. People who are, if they are thought about, are generally in negative terms. As it's just what I said, all those terms I say are unfortunately stigmatized: homeless, sex workers. They call themselves prostitutes. They don't use the term sex workers.
The front row people use the word sex workers.
So people were scolding me for using sex workers so I started asking them, what would you want to be called? And they're like, what I am, a dirty hoe. That's what one person said, to give you some. Yeah. Language is much more, much less important in how, but and drug dealers and homeless people and so.
Did you grow up in a community with this, or did you grow up?
No, I grew up in a very working class. I grew up in a small town in Florida. A lot of people don't think of Florida as being the South, but the area I was in was very South, very much the deep South. Had 500 people. Most of the jobs in the community were based around orange groves. And if you worked in a factory, it was one of the orange juice factories. If you drank orange juice in the 70s and 80s, it usually came from my town. 60s, 70s, 50s, 60s, all the way up until the 80s before the factories left.
What kind of jobs did you have? Jobs in high school or college?
Oh, of course. I was picking oranges.
Okay.
I started picking oranges. Well, I would just say one wrinkle, especially relevant for your audience, is it was a Catholic community, which is very strange. In the South, there's not a lot of Catholics in the South other than New Orleans. There's a monastery. So it was originally, it was a pre-planned community from the 1860s by a very religious person, a Judge Dunn, who was Catholic, and he was given a land grant of five whatever, and he formed these five Catholic communities built around a monastery, St. Leo, Benedictine monastery. So the area is southern but Catholic, and that's strange. Um, and my father was came to the area in 1958. He was a German refugee who was ethnically Polish, Jewish, and not religious and so he came there because a lot of the people who lived in the town were German Catholics who had gotten there. Um, but we were a bit of an outsiders in this town that is also a bit of the outsiders in the South, but it's a very working class. And so one of my first jobs was working in the monastery, actually. But picking oranges, I picked oranges. There are two picking seasons, and you can make extra money picking oranges. And so I was out in the field starting fifth grade, because one of the picking seasons is basically Christmas break. So you spend Christmas break for 2 weeks picking oranges in the groves, and you make $20. That was a lot of money then for someone who was 10 years old, 12 years old. And then
Were
I
there
worked.
other adults picking with you? I mean, what was the community around the orange picking like?
It was mostly Mexican Americans, immigrants. I did it because me and some of the neighborhood kids would. You have to usually to pick you form a like picking team, and me and some of the neighborhood kids would form a picking team because and for 2 weeks we'd pick oranges, and we each make about, I think it was like $40. I ended up making which was a lot. I washed dishes starting in sixth grade. It was illegal for someone my young to work, but I worked. I worked in this little family restaurant, washed dishes. I worked as a monastery, the convent actually, as the kid after school who did all the, took out the garbage. I drove a little golf cart around, and then I eventually worked on the paint crew for the college. So I would work all summers on the paint crew, and it was notable it was unique in the sense that I was an outsider. I was the only white person on the paint crew. It was roughly 20 black guys. And the only reason I had that job is my dad kind of was friends with the foreman, my father was active in civil rights. So we spent a lot of time in the black community there. So I always worked those sort of jobs. And that was kind of the bulk of my childhood was kind of doing quote manual labor, which I don't think kids these days do much. At least my kids don't do that much, which is a problem.
Yeah, yeah.
But I one of the lessons I learned from that was, because I would come back, and then I went to college, and I'd come back summers and do those jobs again. I remember, feeling kind of guilty about, being the college kid working a job that was, with a bunch of very people who were, basically moving on. Clearly, this was just something I was doing temporarily to get the hell out of my town. Yeah. And I remember once telling some friend, I think he's in the book as Stefan. He makes a small appearance in the book, black guy, something along the lines. We were both stoned, I think, because we used to smoke dope back then. And I remember saying something along the lines of like, something along the lines of, I feel kind of like guilty, not guilty, but, try to pretend like I didn't really want to go to college because I wanted to fit in with these guys. And
why did you go to college?
Well, let me just, and he just simply said, what the hell, man? I don't want to be doing. If you can get out of here, get out of here. Yeah. You're lucky, man. Don't feel. If I could, I would. Yep. Why did I go to college? Because my dad was a professor. I was expected to go to college. It was just kind of in the milieu. It was everything that was. It's just how I was raised. My father was a professor, and my mother was a librarian. After. I'm one of 7 kids, so once I'm the youngest of 7. So once I got to the age where she could start working, she started working again as a librarian. So highly educated parents. In my world, I call them front row. And we traveled a lot when we weren't, and so.
Why did your parents settle there?
My dad was a bit of a stranger. He had left, forced to leave Germany in '39. He went to Bolivia with his father. Um, and then they came to the States in 1946. Um, and my father just recently had his PhD in basically anthropology, political science, and they offered a job for him in Tampa, USF, at New College. And he was literally driving from down to Tampa, and he stopped to get gas um, off the interstate about 40 miles away, and they stopped in my hometown, what became my hometown, and he heard people speaking German because like I said, there was some German. We had actually, in a fluke, the town had had held some German prisoner of wars in the war, who settled there because they found other Germans, and it became this kind of German Catholic community. And my father then, had lunch. One of the people speaking English, German, he heard was a monk at the local monastery who invited him to the monastery, and he loved the area so much that he, didn't have much money. He didn't like big towns. It was a small community. They ended up buying a house that was about to be torn down for $3,000, and turned it into a place to raise, kind of on a professor's salary, 7 kids, or junior professor salary. So, I mean, they liked it. It was a rough beginning early. I mean, we were the outsiders. Like I said, the civil rights period was rough. Um, there were certain people in the neighborhood who wouldn't let us play on their yards because we had black friends. The NCAA chapter for the community was started in our house, and my father's car was shot at twice, and one time they shot out the window when him and some of my brothers were in it, for supporting civil rights. So I came along a little bit after all that, but they liked it. They liked the community. They ended up liking the community in a way that wasn't clear from the early stories that they would. But it was a very welcoming community, and so I was raised Catholic just because we were literally a block away from the church, and everybody around you. My dad was very much, when in Rome, do as the Romans, and everybody is Catholic. And so he took a very different message from he took a very different message from his experiences during the 30s and 40s, which was to kind of be open-minded about accepting others. And so, in,
Did you go to public school?
yeah, I did. I mean, I
What
went
was
to
that
Catholic
like?
school for the first 3 years, 4 years,
Okay. Okay.
and then sixth grade they moved me to public school. That was I don't think people understand how shitty the public school system in Florida was, or rural Florida was in the '70s. I mean, we had something called 4515, because there was an influx of Northerners coming into the South, and they didn't want to raise taxes or spend it, and so there was too many students, and so they had something called 4515, where you went 9 weeks and then you took 3 weeks off, so that at any given time only 3/4 of the university was in high school. So it was or junior elementary school. It was a culture shock. I mean, the school was. I mean, it was. I'm glad I went there because the school was roughly 20% Mexican Americans, depending on picking season. 10 to 20%, 30 to 40% black, and 40% white, 50% white. It was a real, and there was some problems, and there was a lot of fights, and there was a lot of tension. But we were all learning to fit in, and we all had to learn to get along in some ways. And I was in this really awkward position because of my father's work in civil rights. The principal of the school was very close to my father. He was a black man, because the school we went to had been the old black high school, and so the colored high school. And so when integration happened, it was turned into a elementary school. But having been the old colored high school, it had no resources that ever been spent on it. It was in a cow pasture. It literally was in a cow pasture. And, there would be times when we'd have to stay inside because the cow would get loose or steer would get loose in the hall. Um, and it was, but we had to learn how to get along, and we generally did get learned. I mean, it was tough, but I wasn't tough. I was in an awkward position because the principal wanted to make kind of a, because the school was so divided by race. Like, I remember the cafeteria was literally like, there was a black section, there was a Mexican section, there was a white section, self-segregated, self-segregated. And the principal would come, Mr. Denard was his name. He would come in and see me and sit me down at the black table to try to start the process of integration, which was, sweet of him and nice, but,
He was
it put
probably
me,
desperate.
and yeah, and physical ed was literally the whites versus the blacks. I mean, the PE teachers didn't care. They just let people choose their own team. And, so I apologize about my language. I'm going to use the language of the 70s, whatever. The white trash kids and the black trash kids would pick their own team. And then, every once in a while, again, Mr. Denard would walk by and pluck me up and put me on the black kids team. or I ended up becoming friends with some of the black kids, because of that, because I also, grew up going to church with them or going to National Association for Information and Color People, NAACP meetings. And so, it was one of the things I just, looking back, us kids were being put in a real bad position. Because, we were just kids, you think, and we were trying our best. Some people weren't, some had really racist parents, and, they were being taught how to be assholes, and, and so that, there were fights, and there were, quote, I don't know, race riots, but they were clear, like, the black kids are going to team up on the white kids, and the white kids are going to team up them. It was just, and the poor Mexican kids were always stuck in the middle, man. They just wanted to like fit in, man. So it was an interesting time, and I ended up, kind of standing in the back and trying my best to just try to, like I said, I used to want to play baseball, man. I just want to play soccer. I didn't want to get involved in all this politics.
Where'd you go to college?
I went to a small liberal arts school in Florida called New College. Another place in Sarasota, Florida, that only has like 500 students at the time, and I kind of took off there. I mean, it was the first place where I really found the community that, I really got into math, which I didn't know I was good at really necessarily, because nobody around me in my community, my parents weren't really mathematically inclined, although my mom was, but she didn't really, she was so much busy as a caretaker that, but there was no math books in my house. There was no kind of role model to kind of see that I was good at math. I was just always really good at math. And so I didn't realize how good at math I was until I got to college. And it was like, wow, this is kind of easy and fun.
So then why'd you go to grad school? How did
I always say it was a path of least resistance, I mean, it was just, it was expected of me, and I was good at math. And
where did you go to grad school?
Johns Hopkins. And I remember when I found out they paid you $9,000 to go to grad school and study the universe, drink beer, and play softball, I was like, this is the best thing ever, man. Like I couldn't believe my luck. You're paying me to learn about the universe and play softball and drink beer. Like 8,000. I mean, that's a lot of money, man. And so, in retrospect, it's still some of the best times of my life was that 5 years.
What did you learn socially making these transitions from high school, then to the liberal arts college, and then to Johns Hopkins? But in terms of the people that were around you, because I would imagine with each level, you're immersed then in a very different community.
And yeah, I mean, it was very academic. And so I kind of, my academic side, so I got further and further away from kind of my childhood experience of growing up in this working class town.
Yeah.
And, one of the things I write about in my book was that difference, that kind of escape from the small town.
Yeah.
And kind of the closed-mindedness and the arrogance that you can find in academic communities, almost looking down at these smaller communities and their, quote, backward ways. Now, I was never that person. I never I never mocked, the people I grew up around. I never called them dumb rednecks. I never called them stupid, religious nuts. But I was surrounded by people who did that. And I certainly, I think if you pressed me at the time, I would have said, I would have rolled my eyes at the silliness of religion. I never really got, gung ho about the strong atheism things. One of the things I mentioned in the book is the preacher man from the job I worked at on the paint crew, when the largely black paint crew, who used to try to get me to read the Bible, and I was just like, no, and then eventually telling him, look, man, I finally broke. Like, he used to they would take 15 minutes every day to read the Bible. He was always trying to convert people. And eventually I just broke, and I said, dude, I'm a fucking atheist. Get that shit out of here. I don't believe Cain and Abel married their sisters or whatever, like a literal interpretation of the Bible. Look how smart I am, sir. I can find the flaws in your book. And then I just remember him turning to me and go, you an atheist, you're gonna rot in hell. And what I write about in the book is how, if you had asked me that day, later that day, what I thought about the whole thing, I would have just said, Jesus, dude, man, that guy bothers me. Like, I just got to get the fuck out of here.
Yeah.
But what I write about in the book, I try to write about in the book, is how I came to basically have a lot more sympathy for him. Or a lot more sympathy is not the right, a lot more understanding of where he's coming from. A lot more understanding of the context of the situation, a lot more understanding of me being the jerk. In that scene, I was the jerk. More than I would like to admit.
So how'd you wind up in the financial sector?
That was, one of the things I learned about being good at physics is, because I ended up going from math to particle physics, theoretical physics, that 99% of the good stuff is done by 1% of the people, and I wasn't going to be one of those people. I just wasn't. But it was also a part of I wasn't a great physicist. It just wasn't. I was naturally inclined at math, but there were a lot of people much more naturally inclined at math than I was, and also to do that, to spend your life studying the universe and the mathematical questions, you got to really, really, really love it. You got to live, breathe it. You got to want to do it on the weekends. And I found myself, I was just talking to somebody who was a grad student with me back and then. It was like, I spent most of my time, on the weekends becoming friends with the janitors and custodians and going to their houses and barbecues and, and going to, West Baltimore and just getting involved in their lives. That's kind of foreshadowing what I ended up doing with my project. That's where I was much more interested in the people I met than I was in the math. And in some senses, finance was a kind of a way station to getting into an industry that was a little bit more people oriented, a little more grounded in reality, believe it or not, and a little bit more, and obviously could pay. I was recently married, and I did want to have a family and all that, and it was intellectually challenging. It was a kind of an intellectual challenge for me.
Yeah. So then the book begins with you living in Brooklyn, and you're working this job, and you start taking walks. Was that just something to get out of the pressure and just,
Yeah. And it was also, my way of learning has always been to walk and just explore. And, I remember when I first got to New York City, telling my wife, because I didn't want to go to New York City. I was kind of intimidated by it, but they paid me a lot, and my wife had grown up in part of New York, so she kind of said she gave me some sense of what it would be like, and I just remember getting there and absolutely falling in love with it, because I remember sitting on the boardwalk, the promenade there in Brooklyn Heights, and just looking out and saying, I think I see 12 forms of transportation. I can just, there's helicopters, there's ferries, there's tugboats, there's cars, there's, it was just so dynamic, and it was so exciting. But also I could take a subway token, go to the end of the line, and be in a different country.
Yep.
And so I would do that. I would take a subway token, go to the end of the line, and walk home. And I started realizing that New York City was just this, patchwork of different neighborhoods strung together. little Albany, little Albania, you go up to the Bronx to go to the Albanian community, go to Bay Ridge and go to the, Korea, go to Sunset Park, and there's the Hasidic community, and then there's the Mexican Americans, and then there's the Chinese. It was just this really wonderful, and it was just this great way of exploring and learning and traveling without leaving your home in some senses, and always sleeping in your own bed at night. So to the degree I could, I would get away and go these walks. And they were, given the way my brain works, the walks were generally built around some goal. Like I literally walked this entire length of the New York City subway system above ground. I called them my terminus walks. I'd go to the terminus, the end of the line, and then walk home. I would walk to, I'd walk to one of my usual walks was to walk to Coney Island from my house and sit on the boardwalk and have a beer at the Russian bar. That became kind of and go through the Jewish neighborhoods and the Pakistani neighborhoods. And so that was always kind of who I was, and that kind of liked it. But they were just more for intellectual curiosity. And then as my life on banking became more frustrating in some ways, my intellectual life, I started to see them as a new way of learning and a new way of thinking. And it became more about the meeting the people along the walks. And what I learned from them became kind of the goal, is to meet more people who would basically make me question how I thought about the world. And that really took off when I kind of brought my camera along, and I started realizing, and I didn't bring my camera along to take pictures of people. I took my camera along to kind of document the weird stuff I'd seen, the funny stores, the this and that, the odd, when I get home, I'd say, I'd tell my family, I can't believe what I saw. Like I saw, blank. And then I didn't have a picture of it. And so then I would have a picture, and I could kind of show people all this cool stuff I saw on these walks. But then when I was, being a white guy in a largely non-white neighborhood with a camera, people started coming up to me and asking me to take their picture. And then they would, we talk while taking the picture, and then they tell me their stories, and then that became the almost collecting stories became the kind of the focus of the walks, as opposed to collecting pictures of buildings.
Do you know where Paterson, New Jersey is?
Yeah,
that's where I grew up.
Okay.
My father took a little church there in 1960, and he was from the Midwest. And he loved taking pictures. And so when he died a few years ago, he left us just thousands of pictures of people and kids from Paterson, because just like you, if he'd have the camera, in a lot of front row communities, if you have a camera, people, back up. But I'll tell you, on the streets of Paterson, kids they just show up.
Yeah, but that's, I mean, first of all, I'm sorry about your father. But that's what always surprises me when people who don't know these communities, like, is it hard to take pictures? It's hard not to take people's pictures. Like, you find yourself saying, like, look, I mean, I gotta go. Like, I really want to take the 99th picture, but I got, I'm really sorry to deny you the chance of me taking your picture. Like, people want you to take their pictures. And in some senses it became, that sort of friendliness, which I always knew about, but didn't really know until, like, I got to be 45 and 50 when I was doing this. I mean, really is kind of what kind of drove some of the project of wanting to show people that these kind of misconceptions about these communities, which, I mean, I don't need to tell you, because you can tell me about the misconceptions of these communities, having grown up in that environment.
How did the idea of the book arise?
Accident. I mean, I was doing this. There was never a project in mind. So I started really kind of doing this with a camera and collecting people's stories and kind of writing about them, like 2010, I'd say. Like a decade ago. And it never really, it never became the idea of a project or a book up until like 2016. So 6 years later, I was just this guy with a camera, kind of enjoying, learning, but enjoying
too. Yeah.
And so, it very much became, this process by which um, uh, kind of just took over my life, literally,
Yeah.
because I quit my banking job, and I became,
Your family
there
was
was this.
okay with that?
Yeah, I mean, like they said, they knew I was a bit of a weirdo. I mean, like I said, for people who know me really well, going into banking was a bigger move, like the bigger kind of head shake, like what, you know. But so when I exited banking, that wasn't that surprising. Maybe to spend time taking pictures of
Yeah.
heroin addicts,
Yeah.
which is what the problem. Because
Yeah.
so eventually the walks became this kind of. I ended up going into this one community, Hunts Point, the most, and spending and taking pictures of pigeon keepers and and then eventually it became working and becoming close to people who are
Yeah.
homeless on the streets.
Yeah.
And so I think one of the fortunate things about working in banking is it does give you a little bit of freedom once you obtain enough money.
Yeah.
So and the thing was, I kind of had that freedom also because nobody in my family, my kids or my wife, really ever really ever got into really luxury things, or we didn't spend a lot.
Yeah.
We still live like grad students largely.
Yeah.
So
When did you take? I mean, you took this to another level with that, minivan, and I mean, you went beyond New York City. How did that happen? I mean,
yeah,
that's a whole
after
nother level.
yeah, after basically 3 years of daily immersion in this one neighborhood with this one group of street addicts,
Yeah.
after quitting my job and spending basically 3 years every day writing the stories, following, becoming friends, trying to take him to detox, visiting him in jail, taking him to the hospital, all that whole stuff, helping them shoot up. I mean, I didn't shoot up myself, but I helped
Right.
them.
Right.
Basically, like some weird mixture of friend, social worker, documentarian. I just got burned out. I mean, it got to be too much.
Yeah.
And I also, still have my old math mind, my old mind as a kind of theorist. And I had learned all these things in the Bronx, these kind of things that I try to put in my book, about the importance of dignity and the dignity I found in these communities,
Yeah.
the inequality we have in this country. Also, as the subject you're most familiar with is faith, and the role of faith, and how the role of faith was so essential, and how I had such a misconception of faith. I wanted to see if these things I saw in Hunts Point were unique to Hunts. Was it just Hunts Point, or was it something more about the inequality in our country? Was it true in what I was seeing in Hunts Point? Was it true in other kind of quote left behind communities? So I took the show on the road, as it were, and I got my van and ended up spending basically 3 years driving around the country. Put 400. I think overall, when I retired my van, I had 450,000 miles on it. I think I started the project with probably 180,000, 200, so like 250,000 miles or so, give or take, on the van. Just driving all over the country.
How did you pick your places to stop?
Kind of similar to how I ended up going to Hunts Point, which was basically people tell you not to go there. I mean, it was kind of mean of me on Twitter, because I'm on Twitter, to use social media. So I'd say, hey, I'm in Michigan. Where should I go? And everybody would say all these places, and I'd go the opposite. I would cross them out not to go there. Like, if you know about them and they like, oh, you have to go to the following restaurant in blank. Well, nope, cross. That means it's a place I don't want to go, because it's being talked about as a good place. And you're left with a place no one says anything other than, whatever you do, don't go to blank. I'm like, I'm going to go to blank. um, and and then I also looked at poverty maps and crime maps, and to try to give a balance to the project. I didn't want to overrepresent one thing that wasn't true of the kind of statistical nature of poverty in the United States. So I try to spend as much time in Black communities as I did in Latino communities, as I did in white communities, as I did in rural communities, as I did in urban. I try to do a balance of all, both everybody's place I went was poor,
Yeah.
but within that, geographical, urban, rural,
Yeah.
red, blue,
Yeah.
by race. So I try to get as many full picture as possible of the true nature of poverty in America.
Yeah. I loved when you talked about McDonald's and churches, because I thought that's exactly right. That's exactly right. Oh gosh. How did you, I mean, well, actually, what I really want to ask you is, I mean, because I'm actually quite now interested in your burnout in Hunts Point, because my father spent 36 years in Patterson, and I, at some point while we're talking, there's going to be some knocking on my door, and um, my father helped start so in the 70s, of course, heroin went through Patterson.
Yeah.
and so right next door to our church, they started in what was called so we were in the north side of Patterson, so it was Northside Addicts Rehabilitation Center, and it was sort of this, get clean of heroin, live in this house, you get counseling, sort of 12-step type stuff, plus God. And the thing is, one of the things that there's a weird attachment. And now over the last number of years, I mean, homelessness is in California cities is continuing to ramp up. And so you build relationships with people. And, I look at a lot of these people and it's like, well, it's either going to be an overdose or they're going to get hit by a car, because of course they're wandering in and out of streets all the time. And it's hard. It's hard because you love these people and they love you. And whereas, because I'm a pastor, nobody's really asking me to help them, buy or shoot up or anything like that. They're more comfortable asking me for food or a ride to the hospital, or maybe, show up in court to speak a good word on their behalf, something sort of ministerial.
Yep.
But I mean, I can really imagine being 3 years and becoming part of that community. I would have sometimes when, so Sacramento doesn't get real cold here, but in the winter it'll get into 30s and 40s at night, and it'll get wet. And there will be times when, I'll drive past, and I know the people.
Yep.
And I know where they're sleeping, and I see their shopping cart, or just kind of the little lump in the darkness. And I would go to bed in my house with heat, with my family and my wife, and I would feel, it was really strange, because on sometimes it wasn't really guilt. It was almost sometimes an envy. And I would feel that, and it'd be like, what on earth is this doing to my mind? And at the same time, as a pastor, I joke, because I talk to, I know a bunch of therapists, and therapists live in this little box, and clients come and clients go and clients pay. But in a church, at a corner with a door, people knock.
Yep.
And they, they can be high out of their mind.
Yep.
They, one day I'm sitting in my office and I hear some noise, and so I open the door, and they're just having sex right outside my office door, and it's right open to the street, and it's like broad daylight. It's like,
come on, guys.
And one guy, he literally slept against my door for 6 years, and we both knew why, because he knew that, and he's kind of a loner. He doesn't get along with anybody, which is part of the reason he's homeless, because he can't live with anybody. But he slept against my door because he knew that, he and I would have to interact if I was going to go into my office and get some work done. And, so for years, even though everybody in the neighborhood knows him, he trusts me, and he knows, I'll hold money for him. I'll bring his mail in. I mean, just do all of these things. He can use my phone to call his parents in another state who are in their 90s. And, and so most of these individuals are living on the street, and they've gone someplace else because they've burned through their familial connections often. But then I listened to your story, and I think, gosh, in some ways, I mean, you're not necessarily religious, you're not a pastor, but it sure sounds a lot like my job.
Yeah, I mean, your job is, I mean, all those things you said, is to some level what I did for 3 years, or ultimately and, I remember there was 2 moments when I realized I just had to take a step back. One was I was drinking too much myself. I was kind of, I mentioned it slightly in the book, but I'd be dealing with these awful things, and then I would just go sit in a bar and drink until closing and try to write about them, but also process them and kind of get away from them, and not really talk to anybody in the bar. I would just sit there in a corner. And I think there was one night I remember when I came home, and I wrote about it somewhere, where I remember seeing things in a very different framework, because I was living in this really nice apartment in this nice neighborhood where I always went home to. That was always the goal. Like, I kept the separation between that, and I didn't do the thing where you did, which is live in the community, which was where you have no separation. But I always made a point of having a separation, and I remember, and they always respected that. No one ever wanted to, they understood that that's my family. That's my, but once that was clear, like, that's his family, that's his money. That's not our, he's got to do right by his family, sort of thing. But I remember parking in my garage, or my parking space, and seeing, right, in the trash from our building, this beautiful rolled up rug being thrown away, and thinking, wow, man, that's like, that could get $200 or $100 on my friends, or they could turn it into because they live in abandoned buildings, so they could unroll it and make a nice space out of it. And then, realizing it came from my apartment, that we had thrown it away.
Wow.
And because some stain had gotten on it or whatever, and, and had been old, but still, it was like, wow. And then there was the kind of times when I would be spending, with my kids and my wife, where I would kind of want to be that guy who always says, yeah, but in Africa, it's so much, when they had a moment of joy. And I was like, that's just not right.
Yeah.
Like, that's not fair to them.
Yeah.
To bring the problems I'm seeing and trying to lessen their pleasure out of life.
Yeah.
It's just not right. That's, that's not right. They didn't do anything wrong. They don't understand why I'm on this weird journey. I mean, I don't need to take down their happiness a notch, and and so, and there was moments when and also there was and this is going to sound bad, there's felt like there was a futility to the whole process. I would take someone to detox. I'd wake up to text messages. We agree we're going to go to detox. I'd drive up to the Bronx. Couldn't find them. End up finding them 2 hours later. Go through the whole, find the place that has intake without. We'll take the picture ID. Oh, I need a Yahoo soda before. Just the whole ring around. Get them in detox. Admit them. Yay. 2-week program.
Yep.
Come back the next day and they've run away from that problem.
Yep.
Eric, why'd you run away? Oh, I got in some fight with this bitch. I was like, so great. Okay. And, or going to visit people in Rikers, and just the dehumanizing process of visiting someone at Rikers shows you how dehumanizing the whole prison itself. I mean, if it's dehumanizing to visit people, what it must, it just should, as an outsider visit, how bad it is to be there. it just got to be too much, where I'm like, I gotta, self-care to some level. I just can't just wallow in the misery here.
Yeah.
And at the same time feeling like I wasn't accomplishing anything.
Yeah.
There was this one case where I had this kind of standing order, if the ducks are lined up in a row, I'll take you wherever you want in the country, and this one, kind of 28-year-old woman, having said at some time that she wanted to go visit her mother in Oklahoma. Her name is Beauty. Her street name is Beauty. And, and she showed me on Facebook that her mom, Beauty, was literally born in prison. Her mom was incarcerated when Beauty was born. And her mom had been a crack addict and meth addict. And her mom had a 3-year chip. And so she showed me on Facebook, she used my computer sitting at McDonald's, surfing. And showing me the family and being really, and so I said to her, because I wanted to make sure all the ducks were like this. I was taking her into her good. So I called her mom and I talked to her mom for 10 times, and I was like, okay, this is a safe situation she's coming back to. Yeah. Her mom is really clean, like not street clean, but really.
Yeah.
Has her own apartment. It doesn't have a dangerous man in the house. Is all set up.
Yeah.
And Beauty wants to go, and so I said to her. I just remember saying off the cuff, it was like, November. I said, okay, Beauty. Because, people can be, I said, if you really want to go to Oklahoma City and go visit your mom and go back to live with your mom, show up here on the day after Christmas in this McDonald's at this booth. And I just, okay, she's not going to show up. So, I showed up there. I drove down from my new home in upstate, and I got there at the McDonald's with the intention of going to Florida to take a vacation in Florida. I just thought I'd honor my obligation and stop by, because Beauty didn't have a cell phone. Right? Yeah. She just, and there she was, sitting packed, ready to go.
Wow.
And I'm like, okay, well, I'm not going to Florida. I'm honor my obligation. And so I did. I said, listen, Beauty. Let's do another 4 hours of thinking about this.
Yeah.
Let's call your mom. Let me call your mom. Let me make sure the ducks are lined up. If we're going to go on this 2-day, and 4 hours later, she still wanted to go for all the right reasons. She wasn't fleeing something. She was. It was just. Her mom was all set up and excited. Had her picked out the meal she was going to have for her. Had her room set up. Yeah. And so we went. We went. It was a pretty intense 2 days because she was in withdrawal during that. But we got her there. And then then Beauty tried to do and her mom was wonderful, solid person. So I was very comfortable. This is a safe situation, and then I left. And then Beauty tried to do the right thing. Her mom tried to get her to Beauty had some old outstanding warrants from when she had left Oklahoma like 8 years before. So she had Beauty go into the police station and turn herself in for the old Oklahoma. And then they ran it, and she had outstanding warrants in New York, and they took her back to New York City. So there was this kind of sense of like, oh my God, what am I fighting against here?
Yeah.
Like the system is just so unfair.
Yeah.
This like, it's just like, and was I even taking to the right, like, why am I injecting myself in this process if all I'm seeming to do is make things worse?
Yeah.
And so, because I'm out of my element here, man, I don't have your training, so I kind of took a step back then, and tried to and then I ended up basically emerging to kind of and after all this work I did that ultimately resulted in my book, I kind of came back to feeling like, people ask me, what can you do? What can you do? It's kind of what the Catholic workers' houses have, and like presumably what your father's house was like, which is just a space to talk to people, can come in and talk. Yeah. Be there to offer people, a non-judgmental conversation or a little judgment.
Yeah, a little bit. Sometimes you need a little
judgment here and there.
Driving a guy to the hospital one day, he says, "Why is it always you driving me to the hospital and me not driving you?" It's like, well, let's see. You sleep on the sidewalk. You don't have a license because you've got 15 DUIs in your history. That's not really a hard question to answer here.
But, yeah, you got to respect people enough to give them agency.
That's right.
Treat them like somebody who's entirely without agency is insulting.
I think, when I listen to your story, so I grew up watching my father do this. My grandfather was a pastor as well, but he was a pastor in rural farming communities in the US and Canada during the Depression and then into the 50s. And so, I remember when J.D. Vance's book came out, and I told my mother, I said, Mom, you gotta read this book. And my mom read it. Mom's like, that's Patterson with white people.
Yep.
But I think, when I listened to your story, you didn't have a community around you or a church, because, when my father and grandfather, everything they did, it wasn't, and this is where I see churches go wrong often. You might have a white church that's sort of left in a black community because the community has changed and the church people love their building, so they don't want to give it up. And then they're merciful and they try and do things for people in the neighborhood. But there's nobody in the church that is living like the people in the neighborhood. And nobody knows. And so you just watch these dynamics go back and forth, and it's like people don't know what they're doing. But when you see a church that's from the neighborhood, in the neighborhood, it's a totally different dynamic.
Yep, exactly. I mean, I it's interesting is because one of the things I write about in my book that I think surprises a lot of people is faith. I have a whole chapter on faith. And, coming from a former atheist, that's pretty surprising, I think. And I think a lot of people in the religious community were very excited to see somebody of my leanings write not only a book that wasn't negative about church, but positive. So I got a lot of outreach from people in the religious community. So I learned a lot through that outreach that I didn't know, because I'm basically self-taught. I don't have your background. I don't have a lot of, and what I realized is one of the things I realized is that there's a real hierarchy in the religious community, and I was in the back row of the religious community, and meaning I was in these community. I was spending time in churches that, as you said, the congregants were drawn from the community, but more importantly, the pastors and the people leading the church, to the degree they had leaders, were also part of the community. And that's what was so, one of the things I try to write about in my book was what was so appealing or so obvious to me about these storefront churches. I mean, there was, what I mean storefronts, I literally mean storefront churches. I mean, like, there was a church I attended that used to be a Kentucky Fried Chicken that had been turned into a church. There was another one that was in a strip mall that had clearly been a furniture store, but was now a church, someone's home that was now a church. So repurposed materials that were turned into churches was how welcoming they were, in the sense that, and it wasn't just, yes, the door is open and you can come in, but everybody around you looked like the community. I mean, so these people I was spending time with who are used to being poked and prodded by the secular help in these kind of dreary institutions with fluorescent lights and rules by outsiders who are like me, who go home and sleep at night, but they walk into a church and that person preaching to them not only looks like them, not only gets them, but might have been an addict before too. So they know the lingo. I mean, it's a cultural familiarity that breeds an empathy, but also it breeds that thing that if you spent, they give them agency. They don't treat them like somebody who doesn't fuck up now and then. Yeah. Oh, I'm here to save you. Like, no, motherfucker, sorry about my language, but just for some of your listeners, it's not for you.
I have my channel pro whenever. Well, most won't.
But no, you can't do that. Like, no.
Yeah.
Got to get right, man. I'm not going to sit here. I've heard that. Look, don't or don't play me for the fool. I've been where you're sitting, man. I know you didn't miss this because you went to a job interview and they didn't let you in. You went because you overslept it, man. Don't fuck with me. So there's a sense of like, I appreciate your game, but don't play it on me.
Yeah.
So, and I think a lot of outsiders fall for the game, and get played.
Yeah.
Some people used to say why do you end up buying people meals at McDonald's? So usually, like, when I walk into the McDonald's, and the reason I spent time in McDonald's is the same reason I spent time in the churches, because they work, and the people who work there are just like the community, and they're welcoming, and people get along there, and they can be there without feeling like a lab rat. The churches and McDonald's are more welcoming to the poor than the university. If a lot of the people I spend time with walking on a university campus that claims to advocate for the poor, they would call the police.
That's right.
I mean, you from your Ivy Tower.
While they're yelling to defund the police, they'll call the police.
It's just like, what? So anyways, it's like, when I go into McDonald's and I immediately, I sit down and someone comes up to me, and the game starts, and they're like, eventually they, we talk, and then they say, hey man, can you slide me a little change? I'm a little rough. I'm like, okay, well, why not buy you a meal? Oh no, man, I really don't like the menu here. I was like, look, man. And then, you just look, I'm going to tell you, look, dude, beggars not choosers. We know that line. Like, I can buy you a meal or not buy you a meal. Like, what do you need that money for? Well, I need to get across town for the bus. I'll buy you a bus ticket. No, not you don't know the right bus. Like, okay, so you're not going to play me this game. I can help you by buying you a meal, and then you get you get the guy, or you buy the meal, right? And then you go outside and sell it for half the money. And at the point, you're just like, dude, why don't you just tell me you were going to sell it? I would just give you the $5,
Yeah.
So, I mean, you got to learn to play the game, and also I think a lot of outsiders get played, and they end up basically disrespecting you more if you get played. Like, you got it, and it comes with the time, familiarity, man. You just and so they it's like give them the agency to be clever to play you. So I mean, I think the whole process is, going back to the churches, is like I said, I think a lot of the people who spend time, as you said, the churches where it really does serve the community, like in a lived reality way, have a lot more, get it a lot more.
Yeah. What did you learn from writing the book? Because I mean, the book sort of, and I loved the front row, back row metaphor, because in many ways it sort of, I thought it really worked well. But, obviously, I mean, the book has a number of, I don't know how well the book has sold. I hope it sold really well. I hope a lot of people read it. But what did you learn from the process of writing a book and the experience of having written the book on sort of from both rows?
One of the things that was one of the frustrations as a writer, and again, I always, writing's hard for me. Math comes easy to me, and writing's hard because is not feeling like you do justice to the people who shared your stories with you. So you talk about, those people giving you your time, wanting you to take your picture, is a sense of like, did I do them right? Because, they were generous with their time. They were generous with their story. Did I do them right? And so there was that frustration of, there's this real immense frustration I had of like, can I explain to people what I saw in a way that, and I got kind of overloaded. Like how do I get this across? How do I get this point across in the way that really gets to people? But also isn't cheap. You don't want to, sure, I can write a book that, that sells well because it gives people what they want to hear. But I don't want to do that. So that's walking that tightrope of, doing something I felt intellectually proud of, but also wasn't so dense that it escaped people. But so when people, going back to that, what you said, that very first thing about you take a camera in the neighborhood, people want you to take their picture. When people say, when the criticisms came from some parts of exploitation, poverty, porn, it was like, my phone is blowing up by people who are mad they're not in the book.
I think I can just imagine people are like, I mean, they carry that book around and they tell, that
and then some of the people in the book are mad because, I didn't get it exactly right, So it was like I was getting it from both sides. The people in the book were like, and of course they think I made $1 million off of it. Like, where's my share? Like, dude, this project I lost money on this project, man. Like, you cannot. And, I went 7-8 years without salary to get paid barely anything for this book.
Right. Most authors make less than minimum wage from the book they write.
So, I did not make $1 million, which was the rumor. Like,
yeah.
I think the rumor was I made $5 million going around the neighborhood. So they're like, and I help people out in the book. I would wire them money.
Yeah.
But I set aside a certain percentage of the money to help people. Yeah. But then the thing that, again, you're not surprised, but I think a lot of people who don't spend time in these communities or have lived in them are surprised. Is more people are mad at me they're not in the book. Like,
where's my picture? Where's my story?
Yeah. And in some cases, I didn't put them in the book because I thought I was protecting them.
Right.
Which, in retrospect, was very insulting of me. Again, going back to the agency thing, like, I was so scared of getting them in trouble.
Yeah.
That I erred on the side of leaving a lot of stuff out.
Yeah.
Which I'm still comfortable having done. But then for them to come back and say they're mad I'm not in the book, is one of those things. Is like, But so there was that. I mean, the reaction in the book for me, the most, you do this project and then you get criticized for it, which I did.
Yeah.
Mostly from the left, which is surprising because I'm on the left. But then. But then
what was their criticism?
It was a Trump voter book. When in fact, if you've read the book, it's mostly African American and Latinos. So it's not a Trump voter book. But I remember, you every once in a while you get like I think I have it here still. One of them is just like someone found me. Someone whose mother had been an addict and died.
Mm.
Found me and wrote me a personal letter.
Yeah.
I get that stuff every once in a while on social media. Someone finds me and says, like, look, man, thank you. Like, I didn't understand one of them was moving was a gentleman whose brother was a heroin addict who just died like 6 months ago. Yeah. But he had managed, but this guy read my book 2 months before his brother died. And because of that, he reached out for his brother and got to spend, he didn't know the guy was going to die, but he when his brother was incarcerated at the time, and he had basically excommunicated his brother from his life. Yeah. But he read my book and he decided to reconnect with his brother. Yeah. And then, 2 months later, the brother died, but he thanked me for being able to spend those 2 months again before his brother. So things like that, are really just kind of made it, all worthwhile. Despite the criticism or despite the the people who text me saying like, oh, yo, man, why are I in the book? Because if I put you in the book, you'd be texting me like, why'd you put me in the book?
That's right. That's right. When my father retired, he wrote a kind of a memoir, and my mother and my sisters and I kind of thought, well, some of the best stories he couldn't put in the book, but I'm so glad, maybe when I'm
maybe when I retire, I'll take my father's book and I'll re-edit it and I'll integrate some of the pictures, because he didn't really do that. And I thought,
Did he not put the best pictures and stories in there because of the same reason?
Yeah. Well, partly
protect
because
people?
some of the people are still alive.
Yes, exactly.
And so, and I always threaten my congregation that when I retire, I'm going to write a book about them. And because I got my own share of stories, and some of them are a little nervous. I said, don't worry, I won't write them till you're gone. They're still nervous.
I mean, I changed some names.
Yep.
And I changed some details.
Yep.
And one of the things I did as a photographer was I kept a lot of pictures out of the book that probably I should have put in if I cared only about, if I didn't care about protecting people. And I probably, like I said, I think I went overboard in protecting people, which
I think that's wise.
Yes, exactly.
Because you don't know what, I mean, because all these people have their own networks, and just like bringing this woman across the country, oh, she's got warrants, and I mean, you don't know what you don't know, and
yes.
And you just don't know. So what's coming next for you? I mean, you wrote the book, and I read the book, and I thought part of this book has got to be therapy for you, just to be able to share some of this.
Yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, you asked about writing the book. Yeah, there was a very much a reflection that gave me a chance to sit back and reflect.
Yeah.
But what's next was I wanted to basically, when you spend 3 years crisscross, I think I'd driven across the country 20 times, 25 times.
Yeah.
When you do that, there are places that stick in your mind that you're not sure why they stick in your mind, that at the time didn't seem like they'd stick in your mind, but there are places that just keep coming back to me and I keep thinking about.
Yeah.
And I wrote a list of like 10 of them down, and I wanted to go back and explore these 10. Like, why are they sticking in my mind? What is it about them?
Yeah.
What's the unifying theme here? What is it that I saw that just won't leave me? And
Yeah.
I kind of know each one, but I want to go back and spend time there. And so I was planning on that, and then COVID hit, and I can't. The way I operate, I can't.
Yeah. No.
I'm very much involved with people, and so I'm sitting here doing nothing. I'm actually trying to write a novel, partially because it solves the problem of people who I wanted to protect.
Yeah.
You can kind of combine characters. You can change stories. You can give it the essence of what you saw without the unnecessary details that harms people.
Yeah. Yeah.
So novels in that sense are very helpful to allow you to communicate what you learned in a way that's easier to read and also protective of people.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm just amazed that you can do this alone, because I mean, so obviously in a place like Sacramento, we live in a very pluralistic religious context. One day my car's in the parking lot, and I get up and I end work and I go into the parking lot, and the Nation of Islam is in my parking lot. And they see me and I see them, and it's like, oh, this is going to be interesting. And because they probably assumed that at least the pastor of this Christian church was black, and then because of the neighborhood it's in, but then I'm white and they're in the parking lot and they didn't ask permission, and it's kind of like, how's this going to go? But one of the things that I see, whether or not people believe the content of the religion, part of what religious narratives do is at least afford sort of a bonding agent around which a community can cohere. And that narrative layer sort of affords, and of course every narrative layer will afford different things, but that narrative layer affords at least maintaining some level of community by which so many of the the grinding insanity and frustration can be at least ameliorated at one level or another, because again, my grandfather had a community around him in which to care for people. My father had a community. I've got a community here with my online stuff, I mean, it's been really weird since my YouTube channel started. We created a Discord server, and in many ways, I see that the community, and that even in that internet space, is a buffer, because I might not be able to connect with everyone's story, but there might be someone in the community who is close enough to their story that they'll have wisdom and connection and all of those things. And so I think it's really, really difficult to really bind the wounds of a community of people without a community. Especially sustain it.
I mean, one of the biggest change intellectually and personally for me has been respect for faith. And the more kind of simple-minded respect initial was just the respect for this works.
Yeah.
Very utilitarian. Like, let's say I believe it's gobbledygook and it's mumbo jumbo, but it's mumbo jumbo and gobbledygook that provides people a network and a community. So it serves a real purpose. Yeah. But I'm at a different level now of. I think that's even a slightly offensive view. Because of the,
it is. Yeah. It's a view from the secularish front row down.
But exactly. But it's at least it's the first step.
Yep.
The next step is saying, well, wait, this is as valid, if not more valid, than where you're looking from, your secular front row, and you're the one who's removed from reality.
Yeah.
You're the one who can't see the evidence for faith. You're the one who has a utilitarian framework for living a very shallow life. As opposed to me, who has a rich community and a warm life that is natural, not a utilitarian.
Yeah.
So, and actually, so you talk about writing the book, that was the hardest chapter for me to that was the hardest point for me to intellectually get, because I was so far away from it. And I don't think I would have got there from my work alone, but I was actually very gifted with an editor who is very spiritual and very religious, and was able to talk over these views I had about religion, and at some point say to me, quite honestly, what you just simply said, well, that's a pretty offensive view of you don't think it is. And that's nice of you, but think a little bit more about that.
So I don't want to probe or push or get in your business or anything, but so what has that done in terms of, if you want to talk, if you want to pass on this question?
I started going to church again. And prior to COVID, I was attending, I went back to Catholic church. I was very, very fortunate that you couldn't give me the more perfect Catholic group than is my church. That happens to be by sheer coincidence is 2 miles away from me. It's friars, Capuchin friars.
Okay. Yeah.
Who are kind of basically exactly the end community. There's a friary 2 miles away from me, but again, by sheer coincidence. And
I don't know about coincidence, but that's I'm a Calvinist, so I don't put a lot of stock in coincidence.
And so, at 9 o'clock every day, there was mass, and one of the brothers there, one of the friars, I guess is the term. I guess in Benedictines it's friars, brothers, but I think in Capuchin, is it Capuchin? That's right. It's Capuchin.
I'm not Roman Catholic. I don't know.
They're very much Franciscans who go into the community.
Okay.
So by sheer coincidence, one of the brothers there was someone who ran a house in Hunts Point, the neighborhood in Bronx.
Wow. Wow.
For people not dissimilar from who I was spending time with.
Yeah.
But again,
Yeah.
and so I was going there, and it was I was half a front row person trying to become religious again, and it was a bit clunky. And then COVID happened, and I got in pretty heavy, and then I kind of pulled back, and then I was starting to go back in, and then COVID happened, and I just can't.
Yeah.
I just can't go. I can't take that risk.
Yeah.
But it was, so it was, and then again, another coincidence is Saul, the priest who ran the church. He's an interesting guy because he had been in the publishing industry, and then and joined the friary at the age of like 45, after kind of ending. So he, here I was writing a book and starting to attend a church with a priest who was a former publisher, and actually knew my publishing house. I was like, this is too.
Wow.
So, and like I said, I kind of went in heavy back into Catholicism, and then I pulled back a little bit, and I hope to go back again. When I'm not sure I found the religious affiliation I went to Catholicism because it's what I knew as a kid.
Yep.
But I still think at least the places that I found where I got the most was the storefront churches, really the ones that really struck a chord with me.
Yeah.
And I saw a little bit within the Catholic faith. I saw a little bit in the Catholic workers' houses that I sometimes would run across.
Yeah. Wow, wonderful. Well, I've pestered you, and thank you so much for your time. I don't know if there's any place we didn't go that you'd like to touch on, or
we can always do, if ever you want to do a follow-up, we can do a follow-up.
Okay.
And I feel bad I didn't ask you enough questions, but I'm sure your listeners know you, right?
My listeners know me quite well, so
okay.
I talk out loud in front of them all the time, and so they.
Before I go,
go ahead.
Your ethnic ancestry. Can I guess?
Sure.
Are you Polish?
Nope.
What is it?
Well,
you look very like you look. The reason I ask is you look like a dead ringer for a friend of mine his last name is Galamalski, who, it's like I'm having like kind of flashbacks of talking to you because I've,
So my father's so my mother. I don't know if you recognize Frisian. The Frisians were an ethnic group in the north part of the Netherlands. So my mother's side came over with the dairy cows to New England, and we just a couple of years before my father died, we learned that on my father's side there were Jews from the northern part of the Netherlands who went to Western Michigan, sort of assimilated with the rest of the Dutch Calvinists. And so that's, so it was.
So Northern European
Jewish, Frisian, Dutch, that kind of mixture. So
German, Polish, Jewish here mixed with English and Irish.
Yeah, that's all that big maelstrom of Northern Europe. And of course the Jews get thrown in there, and on and on and on and on it goes. So,
well, again, thank you so much, and I appreciate it. And you asked me to do this about a year ago, and I ignored it, and I really apologize.
Oh, hey, since I started my channel, I get more requests than I can handle, and I miss emails and tweets. So I completely understand. So, well, God bless you. I hope COVID lifts enough so that you can re-engage with your, your religious community. And I really especially hope you can pick up your project again, because I'd love to read your next book.
Yes. And my publisher wants me to just,
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, and I fully recommend this book. I've been doing it on Twitter, and it is well worth reading. And
thank you again, and I hope we didn't miss anything.
No, well, if we did, we can come back around to it. So
Be safe.
You so much, Chris. Bye-bye.
God bless.